pirate queen who retired peacefully, a scientist who proved hand-washing saves lives, and a man who literally mailed himself to freedom. How are these stories almost forgotten? Let me tuck you into the quiet corners of history where courage whispers, not shouts. Keep listening. Your new favorite sleep story is about to begin. You are now approaching the white chalk cliffs on England's western shore. The pearl-white foam of the waves washes gently over your feet. Standing before you was a little girl whose fate would reveal one of geology's greatest secrets. In 1811, at just 12 years old, she stumbled into a crevice while gathering ammonite shells. And there it was, a massive vertebra, half buried in stone. That single bone belonged to a creature that had slept beneath the sea for 200 million years. A mind-bending paradox, isn't it? A small child, unearthing the giants of a forgotten age. Imagine this. A cold breeze brushes the nape of your neck as the soft bristles of a brush clear centuries of dust, each stroke waking an ancient world. The salty scent of limestone fills your lungs. Somewhere, a seagull's cry echoes across the silent cliffs. Instead of sitting beside her father's grave marker, Mary raced down to the shoreline, piecing together fossils like fragments of a mosaic, turning broken shells into whole stories. But after awakening massive Jurassic monsters, she simply sipped tea in her workshop and looked for the next hidden shell. Would you like to step further into forgotten time and meet someone else who whispered to history? Dear listeners, dim the lights, let the incense curl in the corner, and follow me to the gardens of 9th century Cordoba. Here walks Ziryab, a man whose real name is long forgotten, but whose influence still lingers in your music, your table, and perhaps even your mirror. Born in Baghdad, exiled to North Africa, he found sanctuary in Islamic Spain, where poetry met science and perfume met mathematics. He introduced asparagus and crystal glasses, but also the idea of wearing different clothes for each season, and brushing your teeth with mint, and playing the oud with a fifth string. You see, he wasn't just a musician, he was a tastemaker, a cultural inventor. Picture him now, dressed in dark silks, seated beneath orange blossoms, gently tuning his oud under a crescent moon. The air smells of rosewater and almonds. His fingers flutter like dragonflies, and every note he plays whispers something luxurious, something eternal. In a time when most of Europe still ate with their hands, Ziryab set the table with utensils, perfumes, and etiquette. So tonight, as you lie down in comfort, think of the man who invented elegance. Have you ever wondered how beauty travels from person to person, like a quiet echo? You are lying down now, still and warm. Imagine drifting back to ancient Athens, where one woman had to disguise herself as a man, just to help other women. Her name was Agnodice, and she wanted to heal. But in 4th century BCE Athens, women weren't allowed to practice medicine. So she cut her hair, dressed in men's robes, and studied in secret. Her knowledge grew. So did her compassion. And word began to spread. There was a gentle doctor who truly listened. But rumors also spread that he was too tender, too attentive. Male doctors grew jealous, and when she was finally brought to trial, she revealed her secret in court. Lifting her robes to show she was no man at all, the crowd gasped. Instead of punishment, the women of Athens rose in protest. They defended her, and because of Agnotis, Athenian law changed. Women could finally practice medicine. Can you see her now, in candlelight, wrapping linen bandages, offering olive oil to soothe pain? Her hands steady, her heart open. She risked everything just to care. And tonight, as your breath slows, maybe you'll dream of a time when one brave heart changed the rules for everyone. Hey, friends, turn your thoughts to the sound of bamboo rustling in the breeze and the gentle patter of footsteps on rice paper floors. It's 16th century Japan, and stepping through a temple gate is Yasuke, a man who arrived from Africa and who would one day become a samurai. No one knows exactly where he was born. Mozambique, perhaps. He came to Japan as the servant of a Jesuit missionary. But when Lord Oda Nobunaga saw him, tall, dark-skinned, and composed, he was fascinated. Nobunaga believed Yasuke might be a god. But Yasuke proved something else: honor, loyalty, grace. He learned Japanese. He trained with the sword. And eventually, he was granted the title of samurai, a warrior in a foreign land. Can you picture him now, standing still beneath falling cherry blossoms, his armor catching the pink petals like snow? In his silence, there's strength. In his posture, a story. Though his life faded into legend after Nobunaga's death, his presence remains, a ripple in the still waters of history. Isn't it soothing to think that even the farthest stranger can be embraced and transformed in unexpected ways? You're wrapped in soft blankets, and through your mind's eye opens a silk screen. Behind it, a quiet court in Heian-era Japan. There, under lantern glow, Lady Murasaki dips her brush into ink and begins to write. Not just letters, a world. The Tale of Genji, often considered the first novel in human history, was hers. She wrote in whispers, in fragments, in swirling poetry. While male scribes boasted of war and records, she wrote of longing, of looks exchanged in passing, of moonlight falling on silk sleeves. And she did so anonymously. Women of her time weren't meant to write prose, especially not such intimate, elegant reflections. But she couldn't help it. Words poured out like rain in spring. Now picture her, seated on tatami mats, her sleeves folded neatly. Outside, frogs croak. Inside, stories blossom like plum trees in bloom. She's alone, but she's everywhere. Lady Murasaki didn't just write characters. She gave birth to the idea that fiction could mirror the soul. Isn't it peaceful to know that across time, soft voices still shape the world? Hey friends, if you're enjoying these journeys into history's forgotten corners, don't forget to follow and subscribe. We have 95 more quiet stories to uncover. You might be tucked in right now, surrounded by silence. But in 1730s Pennsylvania, silence was something Benjamin Lay refused to accept. He stood just over 4 feet tall, a hunchbacked Quaker with a long white beard and a piercing voice. He spoke for those who could not, the enslaved, the silenced, the forgotten. At a time when even his fellow Quakers owned slaves, Benjamin Lay stormed into their meetings and made them confront their hypocrisy. Once, he stabbed a Bible with a sword, and red juice burst from a bladder he'd hidden inside. Blood, he said, on their hands. People mocked him, avoided him, but he kept speaking. He lived in a cave with goats, wore rough flax clothes, and made his own shoes, because he refused to participate in injustice. Can you imagine him now, lantern in hand, feeding his goats under a cold moon, whispering prayers into the night? Not angry, just resolute, Benjamin Lay was buried quietly, but his words echoed. A century later, abolitionists read his writings and remembered. Sometimes the smallest figure carries the biggest truth, and sometimes the most radical thing you can do is stay kind. Dear listener, let your thoughts drift to Han Dynasty China, where scrolls unfurl like petals and one woman quietly changes everything. Her name was Ban Zhao, historian, poet, teacher, philosopher, and the first known female Chinese court scholar. After her brother died mid-task, Ban Zhao completed his magnum opus, the Book of Han, a sweeping account of their entire dynasty. But she didn't stop there. She taught astronomy, composed essays, and even wrote lessons for women, a text still studied today for better or worse. Imagine her now, seated at a lacquered desk lit by oil lamp, with ink-stained fingers and brows furrowed in thought. Outside, snow hushes the garden. Inside, history takes shape. She advised emperors and shaped imperial education policy. Yet she moved gently through life, rarely praised, often unnamed. Ban Zhao wove clarity from chaos and dignity from silence. Wouldn't it be calming to believe that behind every great archive, someone's soft voice held the threads together? You are in a dim, stone-walled library now. Candlelight flickers against wooden shelves, and sitting at a lectern is a scholar named Juan Latino. Born around 1518, the child of an enslaved African woman in Spain, he rose to become a professor of Latin at the University of Granada, fluent in Greek and poetry, married a white noblewoman, published verses that shook the empire. How? Because he read, he studied, he believed, he endured. Imagine him now, robed and calm, reciting Virgil to a crowded hall, while whispers about his skin echo faintly in the back. He hears them, but he keeps reading. He teaches because knowledge has no color. Juan Latino defied every expectation, and yet, quietly, gracefully, rewrote what it meant to belong in a classroom. Isn't it peaceful to picture a mind like his, turning silence into sonnets? Hey, friends, close your eyes and imagine a woman weeping, not from grief, but from divine visions, walking barefoot across medieval Europe. Her name was Marjorie Kempe, and she dictated what many believe to be the first English autobiography. She couldn't read or write, so she told her story aloud. A scribe wrote it down. Visions of Jesus, loud sobbing in churches, arguments with priests, pilgrimages from England to Jerusalem and back. People thought she was mad, or a prophet, or both. But she kept walking, kept speaking, kept weeping. Now imagine her, sitting at a fire, voice cracking, eyes wide with some ancient light, her feet swollen from miles walked in sandals, still telling her truth. Marjorie's book was lost for centuries, then rediscovered in 1934 in a dusty trunk. Her words returned like a whisper across time. Do you ever wonder how many voices waited patiently just to be heard? You are watching the flicker of candlelight dance across your ceiling. And across the Nile, in a house of books, a man waits for sunrise. Not to pray, but to experiment with light itself. Ibn al-Haytham, 11th century, born in what is now Iraq. He's called the father of optics. He didn't just theorize. He tested. He built a dark room, the camera obscura, to study how light travels. He challenged ancient ideas with observation. He even faked madness to avoid working for a cruel caliph, just so he could keep learning in peace. Picture him now, lying still in darkness, waiting for a pinhole of light to mark its path on the wall. That line of light? It would become the blueprint for how cameras, vision, and lenses work. He wrote of shadows, reflection, refraction, and through his careful watching, he revealed how we see ourselves. So, as you close your eyes tonight, remember, the light you see now travels the same way he once watched, in wonder. Isn't it lovely? How knowledge can glow even in the dark. You're seated now in a quiet dome, stars above, the hush of scrolls turning beside you. In this ancient library, a woman steps forward, not as a muse, but as a master. Her name is Hypatia, mathematician, astronomer, philosopher. Born around 360 CE in Alexandria, Egypt, she taught Plato and Ptolemy to rooms full of men. They listened, not because they were told to, but because she spoke clearly with fire and grace. She charted celestial motions, designed astrolabes, wrote commentaries on geometry, and when asked why she never married, she reportedly held up a bloody rag and said, "This is what you're so eager for." Imagine her gliding through a marble hall, robes whispering, her mind faster than any comet. Outside, the city simmers with tension, but inside her classroom, time slows. She lived in an age of crumbling empires and rising zealotry, and when the world turned violent, her name was lost for a while. But her mind never dimmed. Isn't it calming to know some ideas travel farther than any army, any empire? Hey friends, listen closely. Can you hear the roar of a crowd echoing through the ancient stones of Rome? You're sitting in the Circus Maximus now, dust swirling beneath your feet, and thundering around the track is Gaius Apuleius Diocles, the most successful charioteer of all time. Never heard of him. That's the point. He won 1,162 races, amassed more wealth than nearly any Roman general, and yet his name slipped between the cracks of memory. He began as a modest driver from Lusitania, modern-day Portugal, but he mastered speed, balance, and risk. Chariots in those days? Wooden, fast, deadly. One false move, and you were trampled. But Diocles played the long game. He rarely led from the start. He waited, studied, surged at the end. Picture him now, reins taut, sand flying, sun glinting off his bronze helmet. And in the final turn, he strikes. By the time he retired, he was a living legend. And then, silence. History remembers generals and emperors, but the man who made thousands cheer every day? Forgotten. Maybe tonight, as you breathe slowly, you'll feel the echo of hooves, and remember the thrill of someone who mastered the art of timing. You're walking barefoot now through cool stone corridors, where light filters through arches, and something feels sacred. This is the world's oldest still operating university, and a woman built it. Her name was Fatima al-Fihri. In 859 CE in Fez, Morocco, she used her inheritance not for luxury, but for knowledge. She founded Al-Qarawiyyin, a place where mathematics, theology, astronomy, and languages would flourish. And though records of her life are sparse, her vision endures. She fasted while the foundations were laid, prayed as the walls rose, Her quiet devotion shaped generations. Imagine her standing beneath the sun, veil drawn, hands calloused from oversight, not ceremony. She wasn't seeking glory, just truth, learning. Centuries before Oxford, before Bologna, before the Sorbonne. Her school welcomed scholars from across the Islamic world and beyond. Even Pope Sylvester II would later study Arabic numerals there. Fatima's name is whispered in quiet corners of history books, but the archways she built still rise with morning light. So tonight, as your thoughts wander gently, let them drift to a woman who sowed wisdom in stone. Isn't it peaceful to think the mind's garden can outlive us all? You are floating through incense-thick air, somewhere between east and west. And before you, in robes of Chinese silk, stands a Jesuit with a map in his hands. Matteo Ricci, 16th century. An Italian who journeyed to Ming China, not to conquer, but to listen, to learn. He mastered Mandarin, adopted Chinese dress, studied Confucian texts. He wasn't always welcomed, but he wasn't deterred. Slowly, patiently, he earned trust. Imagine him sitting cross-legged beside a scholar in Beijing, sipping bitter tea, pointing to the stars and whispering their names, first in Latin, then in Chinese. He brought telescopes, clocks, mathematical proofs, but he also brought openness, respect. His world map, Kunyu Wangguo Quantu, was the first of its kind to show both hemispheres to China. A sphere, not a square. A planet, not a kingdom. And, though he died far from home, he was buried in Beijing with imperial permission, the first Westerner to receive that honor. Matteo Ricci reminded us that the bridge between cultures begins with humility. Isn't that a soothing thought, as languages fade into dreams? Dear listener, let candlelight flicker against your dreams, and follow it to a convent cell in 17th century Mexico, where a woman writes against the silence. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, nun, poet, genius. She taught herself Latin at 3, wrote plays, sonnets, and philosophy. And when critics told her to put down the pen, she answered with ink. She called the soul a mirror. She questioned theology. She wrote not for fame, but because her mind could not be quieted. Imagine her now, cloistered in her library of thousands of books, her quill scratching against the quiet. Outside, bells, birdsong, and colonial shadows. Inside, fire. She wrote of love and intellect, of the moon and injustice. And when the church silenced her, she obeyed, but left behind a storm of pages. Sor Juana's voice, muffled then, rings clear now. As you rest your head, think of her verses curling softly into the night. Isn't it lovely that some whispers grow louder over time? You're drifting now through humid air and southern pines, and the story you're about to hear begins in royalty, but ends in bondage. Abdul Rahman Ibrahima was born a prince in West Africa, educated, noble, fluent in Arabic. But in 1788, he was captured and sold into slavery in Mississippi. For 40 years, he labored under the hot sun, tilling land he once would have governed. He wrote letters in Arabic, trying to reach anyone who might remember him, and someone did. When President John Quincy Adams heard of his story, Abdul Rahman was granted freedom at last. But his children, born into slavery, remained behind. He traveled back to Africa, but he never reached his home. He died en route. Picture him under a starry American sky, praying eastward, whispering a language the fields had long forgotten. He never stopped believing he was more than what they saw. Isn't it comforting to know that even broken chains still ring? You're standing in a candlelit studio now, oil, pigment, and canvas. And there she is, sleeves rolled, brush steady, eyes locked on her subject. Artemisia Gentileschi, 17th century Italian painter, survivor, genius. She painted women not as muses, but as warriors. Judith slaying Holofernes, Susanna resisting lechers. Her works pulsed with fury and grace. She was the first woman admitted to Florence's Academy of Art. But her journey began with trauma, a trial, a public shaming, and a resilience that bled into every stroke of her brush. Imagine her painting by moonlight, mixing colors with calloused fingers, the scent of linseed oil rising around her. She signed her canvases boldly, Artemisia the woman, so no one could forget. Today, her name is on museum walls, but for centuries, it wasn't. Let her story remind you that beauty can emerge from brokenness, and as you sleep, know that every color has a voice. Hey friends, picture snow falling softly on ancient Japan. Hoof prints vanish in the white, and riding through that silence, armor glinting, is Tomo Gozen, a female samurai, warrior, archer, commander. She lived in the 12th century during the Genpei War. Her legends are fierce. She decapitated enemies in single combat, led charges, and fought beside her lord until the bitter end. Yet she vanished from history soon after. Some say she became a nun, others a wandering swordswoman. But in every telling she rides alone, silent as snow. Imagine her now, katana sheathed, eyes scanning the horizon, not with anger, but with stillness. Tomo Gozen's name was nearly erased, but in bedtime stories and ancient scrolls, she lives. Isn't it peaceful to know some ghosts ride quietly beside us? You're gazing out across the Mongolian steppes, wind in your ears, and there, racing across the plains, is Kutulun, Genghis Khan's great-great-granddaughter. She was a warrior princess, a wrestler, a strategist. She declared she would only marry a man who could beat her in a match. 100 suitors tried. All failed. Each left behind a herd of horses. Her father's flocks grew immense. She fought beside him in battle, led troops, defied traditions. Can you picture her now, arms crossed, laughter on her lips, surrounded by neighing stallions? Her strength wasn't just physical, it was unshakable will. Marco Polo even wrote of her, but over time her tale faded, replaced by myth. Yet somewhere, on quiet nights, the wind still carries her name. Wouldn't it be lovely if history made more room for wild, laughing strength? You are now in an 18th century Parisian salon. Candles flicker, a violin hums, and on the stage, poised in satin and lace, is Joseph Belloni, composer, fencer, son of an enslaved woman. They called him the Black Mozart, though truly, Mozart once opened for him. He was born in Guadeloupe, raised in France. A master of the blade and the bow, he led orchestras, fought duels, composed operas, defended the revolution. Imagine him now, standing with quiet poise, violin under chin, drawing music from silence, each note elegant, deliberate, like his swordplay. He was barred from conducting certain operas due to his race, and yet he kept playing, composing, leading. His music faded for a time, but it's returning now, note by note. So tonight, as strings sing softly in your dreams, know that brilliance needs no permission. Ah, hey, friends, if this journey into history's hidden corners brings you peace, don't forget to subscribe. There are still 80 quiet stories waiting just ahead. Hey, friends, close your eyes and imagine the quiet hum of monks chanting through a stone abbey, somewhere in early medieval England. Here, by the soft light of a high window, sits Bede, a monk, a scholar, a gentle keeper of time. In the 8th century, Bede lived in the monastery of Jarrow. He rarely traveled. He didn't lead armies or rule lands. But with ink-stained fingers and endless patience, he wrote the first complete history of the English people. Not just names and dates, but seasons, eclipses, and saints' days. He even helped standardize the calendar itself. Before Bede, history was a tangle of local reckoning. After him, a common timeline. AD and BC. Picture him now, hunched over parchment, his quill whispering Latin syllables into the silence. Behind him, candles flicker. Outside, geese fly south. Though he never left his cloister, Bede's words traveled centuries. He died mid-sentence, dictating scripture translations. And yet his voice lives quietly in every history book that begins, at the beginning. Isn't it peaceful to know that time itself was once cradled by a monk's steady hand? You're wrapped in blankets now, soft and still. But once, beneath falling snow, a young woman crawled through frozen brush, calm as moonlight. Her name was Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a Ukrainian history student turned sniper during World War II. She tallied 309 confirmed kills, fought in Sevastopol, survived siege after siege. The press called her Lady Death. But her letters, her diaries, reveal something gentler. Quiet focus, deep loss, a longing for calm. Imagine her now, lying in snow, breath barely rising. A photograph tucked into her coat. Eyes steady, heart silent. When the war ended, she visited America. Eleanor Roosevelt invited her to the White House. She spoke to crowds, not of glory, but of grief. Her boots carried stories others dared not tell. Later, she faded from headlines, taught, laughed, lived quietly. She wanted to be a historian, and yet history needed her first. So tonight, let her name rest beside you like fresh snow, soft, real, and brave. Have you ever wondered what becomes of warriors when they finally find peace? Dear listener, your eyes grow heavy, but imagine opening them, just for a moment, in a candlelit room filled with scrolls and stars. Here is Al-Khwarizmi, 9th century scholar, mathematician, and the reason we even have algorithms. Born in Persia, he worked in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. There, he wrote a book so quietly powerful it gave us the word algebra. He introduced Hindu numerals to the Islamic world, what you now call 0 through 9. His work wasn't flashy, just logical, elegant. Picture him drawing lines in sand, solving for the unknown with charcoal and patience. No calculators, no digital screens, just reason and wonder. He showed that math wasn't just numbers. It was patterns, puzzles, paths. Centuries later, algorithm still carries his name. Your phone, your maps, your music. They whisper, Al-Khwarizmi in every silent computation. So tonight, if you fall asleep, counting softly, remember who first gave form to that rhythm. Isn't it lovely that even logic can feel poetic? Hey friends, drift with me now over a quiet sea. The waves roll gently, lanterns bob in the distance, and beneath them sails Qingshi, the pirate empress. In the early 1800s, she commanded over 70,000 outlaws in the South China Sea. A former courtesan who took over her husband's fleet and multiplied it tenfold. But she wasn't brutal. She was disciplined, smart. She issued a strict code of conduct. No harm to civilians. Share the loot. Obey orders. Her pirates followed her not out of fear, but respect. When governments tried to capture her, she outmaneuvered them. China, Britain, Portugal, no navy could stop her. Eventually, she retired, negotiated a pardon, kept her fortune, opened a gambling house, died peacefully in her bed. Can you imagine that? A pirate queen who slipped into old age like a wave into shore. Tonight, as your breath rises and falls like the tide, remember her calm command across open water. Isn't it soothing to think that power too can be quiet? You're in a quiet garden now, dew on the leaves, a single orchid opening at dawn, and beneath its shade kneels Janaki Ammal, India's forgotten botanist. Born in 1897, she loved plants, their colors, their secrets, their patterns. She studied sugarcane, orchids, and brinjal. She altered chromosomes and improved crops, but often the credit went elsewhere. As a woman, as a scientist, as someone who defied caste, she earned her doctorate in the United States, returned home, planted forests, preserved native species. Imagine her now, walking barefoot through damp soil, whispering names to flowers others overlooked. She believed nature was a memory keeper, and she listened. Though her discoveries shaped agriculture, her name faded into the undergrowth. But seeds remember, and so do we. Isn't it peaceful to know that even in silence something still grows? Dear listener, let your thoughts drift to colonial Boston. A cold morning. A quiet man handing knowledge to a world unready for it. His name was Onesimus, an enslaved African who changed medicine forever. In 1721, smallpox plagued the city. People died by the hundreds. But Onesimus told his master of a practice from his homeland, something he'd seen done in Africa. Take a small amount of smallpox from the infected. Place it under the skin of the healthy. It sounded dangerous, but it worked. The process, called inoculation, would evolve into vaccination. It saved thousands. Imagine Onesimus now, standing by a fire, explaining calmly what others feared. He didn't shout, he simply shared. Though his name faded, his wisdom didn't. And tonight, as we live in a world shaped by vaccines, remember the man who whispered healing across oceans. Isn't that a comfort? That care can travel, even when credit doesn't. You are standing in a marble hall, and here she comes, calm, tall, radiant. Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba, a woman who met colonizers with strategy. In 17th century Angola, as the Portuguese invaded, Nzinga negotiated, then resisted. When denied a seat at the table, she ordered a servant to kneel, sat atop his back, and began the talks. She led armies into battle, dressed as a man, offered refuge to runaway slaves, converted, allied, defied, deceived. She survived, where most were broken. Picture her now, lit by torchlight, whispering war plans over river maps. Her presence was steel wrapped in silk. She ruled into her 60s, died in peace, and long after, mothers in Angola still named their daughters Nzinga, for courage, for cunning, for calm. Isn't it powerful? How one steady gaze can hold back an empire? Hey friends, dim the lights a bit more. We're stepping into mirrors now, into masks, disguises, quiet rebellion. Claude Cahun, born Lucy Schwab, was a French writer, surrealist, and gender-defying artist. In the 1920s, they posed in photographs with shaved heads, painted faces, military coats, or delicate gowns. Always shifting, always questioning. Their art whispered, "Who are you?" when no one is watching. During World War II, Claude lived on occupied Jersey Island and resisted the Nazis, using words. They left notes in soldier pockets, wrote poems, stirred doubt, got arrested. But they never begged, never broke. Imagine them now, hunched at a candlelit desk, cutting words like glass, smiling at their reflection. Claude's work was largely ignored for decades, but today they inspire artists everywhere. Isn't it soothing to think that identity can be a soft revolution? You're washing your hands now, warm water, gentle soap, a simple act. But once it was revolutionary. Ignaz Semmelweis, a 19th century Hungarian doctor who noticed something odd. Women giving birth in hospital wards staffed by doctors died more often than those cared for by midwives. The difference? Doctors didn't wash their hands after autopsies. He suggested soap, cleanliness. His peers laughed, mocked, refused. But the death rate dropped. He saved lives, quietly, repeatedly. He died in obscurity, forgotten. But later, Pasteur and Lister proved him right. Picture him now, hands trembling, sleeves rolled, urging students to scrub. Not for praise, but for people. His name returns every time we disinfect a wound. Isn't it beautiful? How care can begin with a single gesture. You are sitting beside a glowing fire in Aotearoa. Smoke curls skyward, and across from you sits Te Puea Hirangi. Maori leader, dreamer, builder. In the early 1900s, her people faced colonization, disease, and war conscription. She said no. She gathered orphans, built schools, planted fields, spoke peace, but stood firm. They called her stubborn. She called it mana. She revived dances, songs, and the sacred canoe-building traditions, preserved language, restored pride. Imagine her now, barefoot in the earth, humming an old tune, tracing constellations with her finger. She didn't lead with force. She led with belonging, and her name still echoes in New Zealand's hills. As you close your eyes tonight, may you feel her steadiness settle beside you. Isn't it calming to know that culture can be a kind of healing? Hey friends, look up, way up, to a calm, star-speckled sky. Now, imagine a young woman in 18th century China, standing beneath those same stars, calculating their movements. Her name was Wang Zhenyi, astronomer, mathematician, poet. At a time when women weren't allowed formal education, she taught herself. By candlelight, she translated complex texts. She built models of lunar eclipses with paper globes and mirrors. She wrote poems to explain gravity, essays about equality. She wanted people to see science as beauty, not fear it. Picture her now, sleeves tied back, brush in hand, inked fingers tapping formulas on bamboo. Outside, crickets sing. Inside, equations bloom. She only lived to be 29. But her mind danced across centuries. She dismantled the notion that intellect belonged to one gender. And though her name faded in history's tide, her ideas still orbit quietly, like the moon she once mapped. Isn't it peaceful to think that some brilliance shines softly just above the clouds? You're sitting quietly in a library, maybe sipping tea. Imagine a young student named Charles Darwin, and the man who taught him to prepare birds. His name was John Edmonstone, a formerly enslaved black man from Guyana, now free and living in Scotland. He worked as a taxidermist, precise, gentle, patient. He taught Darwin how to preserve specimens, how to observe the details that matter. That knowledge would later shape Darwin's travels and the theory of evolution. John's own history is mostly lost. No portraits, no long biographies. But his skill, passed on, hand to hand, imagine him now, carefully stitching a wing, pausing to explain feather types. Calm voice, steady hands, a mentor whose influence quietly echoed through science. Without John, Darwin's observations might have faded. Instead, they flourished. Isn't it lovely? How one quiet teacher can change everything without even trying to be remembered. Dear listener, your eyes may grow heavy, but picture a throne room in Ghana filled with silence. And rising to her feet, an elder woman, straight-backed and steady. Ya Asante Wa, Queen Mother, rebel, guardian of the golden stool, the soul of the Ashanti people. In 1900, when British officials tried to claim the sacred stool, she spoke. If you men will not fight, we women will. And she meant it. She led warriors against colonial forces, outmaneuvered generals, fought fiercely for her people's spirit. Now imagine her beneath palm trees, giving orders with calm precision, wrapped in kente cloth, her voice firm but never loud. Eventually, she was captured, exiled, but never defeated in heart. Today, her name is sung in Ghanaian songs, her strength echoing in daughters and mothers. Isn't it powerful? How resistance can rise from silence, from age, from grace? Hey, friends, take a deep breath of forest air. Can you smell the moss, the flowers, the rain-drenched soil? You're walking beside Alexander von Humboldt now, explorer, naturalist, poet of the earth. In the early 1800s, he traveled across South America, mapping volcanoes, cataloging plants, measuring magnetic fields. He saw the world not in pieces, but in patterns. He noticed how human activity changed climate, how rivers connected ecosystems. He called nature a web, centuries before climate change became common. He influenced Darwin, Jefferson, Thoreau, yet few today remember his name. Imagine him standing at the edge of a waterfall, notebook soaked, eyes sparkling, not chasing fame, just wonder. He wrote with awe. Everything is interaction, he said. Every leaf, every breeze, every whisper. And tonight, As the breeze brushes your cheek, maybe you'll feel what he felt, that we are not above nature, but among it. Isn't that a comforting thought, that even silence connects us? You are deep in a dream now, but let's slip quietly into a shadowy train station in 1940s Europe. A woman walks by, unnoticed. Inside her coat, false passports, coded messages, cyanide pills. Christina Skarbek, Polish countess, British spy. Brave heart. She worked for Churchill's secret army. Parachuted into Nazi territory. Smuggled intelligence through the Alps. Talked her way out of a Gestapo prison, using just charm and frostbitten determination. Imagine her now, leaning on a cold window pane, listening, calculating, not out of fear, but purpose. After the war, her name faded. She was too mysterious, too unclassifiable. But her missions saved countless lives. Ian Fleming said she inspired the first Bond girl, but she was no one's sidekick. She once said, "You must have the courage to go on." And she did. Isn't it soothing to know that even the quietest figures can carry the loudest courage? Hey friends, imagine moonlight on iron bars. Somewhere in Western Australia, a man whistles softly as he picks the lock again. Meet Moondine Joe, a 19th century convict with a gentle smile and a love of escape. Transported from England for stealing food, he escaped more prisons than most men entered, but never with violence. He'd vanish, then reappear with a new alias, helping settlers, mapping forests. Authorities built a special cell just for him. Stone walls, heavy chains. He escaped that too. Imagine him now, barefoot in the bush, laughing quietly at the stars. He wasn't angry, just unwilling to be caged. Locals began rooting for him. The governor even offered a pardon if Joe could behave. And he did, eventually. Isn't it peaceful to think that even mischief, if gentle, can become legend? You're dozing gently now, but let your thoughts gallop across a desert battlefield. Dust swirls, and, leading the charge, a veiled woman in black armor. Kahawla bint al-Azwar, 7th century Arab warrior, sister of a commander, fighter in her own right. When her brother was captured, she picked up a sword and stormed the field. Men thought she was a phantom. She fought like lightning. Later, she led troops, battled Romans, and became a symbol of courage whispered in tents and poems. Imagine her now, sword at rest, watching stars, face uncovered in solitude. No monuments, no coins, just stories passed between generations. Isn't it beautiful when bravery is told in whispers? Dear listener, you're tracing your fingers over Korean silk. On it, landscapes, flowers, calligraphy. Behind it, a woman's name, Shin Saim-dang. Artist, poet, philosopher, mother. In 16th century Korea, she painted in a time when women were expected to remain unseen. But her work bloomed with detail, light, serenity. She raised 7 children, including the great Confucian scholar Yulgok. And yet, she painted moonlit rivers, bamboo forests, birds mid-flight, as if time stood still just for her. Imagine her now, grinding inkstone, her brush lifting into space. She doesn't speak, she simply flows. She became known as Wise Mother, Good Wife. But her artistry speaks for itself. Her portrait graces South Korea's 50,001 bill. Still, her name outside the country remains almost unheard. Isn't it calming to remember that beauty can be its own form of wisdom? You're lying still, and the air is thick with the scent of sugarcane. In the Caribbean breeze, a quiet revolution begins. Toussaint Louverture, former slave, brilliant tactician, founder of Haiti's independence movement. Born in Saint-Domingue, he led a rebellion that reshaped the world. Outmaneuvered European empires, declared that freedom, once earned, could never be revoked. He didn't scream, he negotiated, led armies, read Enlightenment texts by candlelight. Imagine him in a plain coat, pacing beneath banana trees, plotting freedom like a chessboard. Captured, imprisoned in France, he died in cold silence. But Haiti would rise. His dream lived on. Isn't it peaceful to know that even in chains, a mind can remain free? Hey, friends, look back up at the stars. There's one name among them, Caroline Herschel, astronomer, singer, comet chaser. Born in 1750, she survived smallpox and childhood neglect. Trained as a soprano, she followed her brother William to England, where they both watched the sky. She discovered comets, cataloged stars, earned a gold medal from the king, yet often worked in the background, uncredited. Imagine her now, telescope adjusted, breath fogging the lens, whispering to the stars as if they might whisper back. Her notebooks still exist, dotted with careful ink and tiny exclamations. She once wrote, "I have been employed to sweep for comets," and sweep she did, across history's floor, leaving behind a trail of light. Isn't it lovely that some stars are written not in fire, but in quiet ink? Hey friends, settle into your pillow, and let's walk through the soft clatter of boots, the scent of antiseptic, and the hum of healing during wartime. This is the world of Mary Seacole, a Jamaican-born nurse who brought warmth to the frozen battlefields of the Crimean War. She wasn't invited, she wasn't funded, but she went anyway. Denied by Florence Nightingale's team due to her race, she sailed on her own dime, set up a boarding house near the front, and tended to wounded soldiers with herbs, food, and laughter. Picture her now in a makeshift kitchen, stirring broth, snow falling, cannons distant, a smile behind her apron. They called her Mother Seacole. Her remedies soothed pain when supplies ran low. Her spirit stayed when others retreated. After the war, she returned home penniless, but soldiers remembered. They raised funds, told her story. Yet over time, history tucked her behind louder names. But tonight, she walks quietly among us again, carrying warmth in both hands. Isn't it comforting to know that kindness travels farther than glory? You are standing beneath desert stars now, and there, wrapped in a scholar's robe, ink on his hands, is Avicenna, the philosopher of Persia. Born in 980, he memorized the Quran by 10, healed patients at 16, and by 21, wrote medical books that shaped the next 600 years. His Canon of Medicine described infections, nerves, brain anatomy, long before Europe caught up. He believed the body and mind were intertwined. Imagine him in a quiet study, oil lamp flickering, sipping mint tea while composing thoughts on consciousness. He once said, "The world is divided into men who have wit and no religion, and those who have religion and no wit." Avicenna had both. He wrote of logic and spirit, science and soul. His name faded in Western textbooks, but in the East it remains, like a candle kept lit in silence. Isn't it peaceful? How deep thought whispers across centuries? Dear listener, let's step into sea spray and tangled ropes. A woman boards a ship disguised as a man. Her name, Jeanne Barré, the first woman to circumnavigate the globe. In 1766, she joined a French expedition by binding her chest, changing her name, and becoming Jeanne. Why? To study plants, a botanist's assistant in public, his equal and perhaps his partner in private. She collected and documented hundreds of species, trekking through jungles, mountains, and shores, with no fanfare, no credit. Her secret was discovered mid-voyage, but by then she had proven herself. Imagine her now, kneeling in a clearing, tucking petals into linen, fingers stained green with chlorophyll. She brought home the bougainvillea, but France barely remembered. Only centuries later did her name bloom. Isn't it gentle justice when lost names finally return like spring? You're lying still, and in the corner of your mind ticks a clock, wooden, handmade, precise, built by Benjamin Banneker, a free black man born in 1731. He taught himself astronomy, predicted eclipses, published almanacs. He even helped survey the land that would become Washington, D.C. When Thomas Jefferson questioned black intelligence, Banneker replied with a letter and enclosed his calculations. Imagine him in his farmhouse, candlelight flickering over star charts, whittling gears from memory. No formal schooling, just observation, patience, and wonder. His clock ran for decades, his ideas longer. He lived simply, died quietly, but his mind, celestial. Isn't it lovely? How knowledge can tick forward even when no one's listening. Hey friends, are your dreams starting to flicker? Well, here's someone who would have found that fascinating. Artemidorus, a 2nd century Greek writer. He wrote the earliest surviving book on dream interpretation, the Oneirocritica. He believed dreams weren't omens from gods, but mirrors of your waking life. Worries, loves, desires, disguised in symbols. He interviewed hundreds, listened patiently, cataloged patterns. His work influenced Freud, 1700 years later. Imagine him in a quiet marketplace, asking a merchant what he dreamt last night. He listens, nods, and writes. He wrote for the common people, not philosophers. He thought everyone deserved to understand their mind. His name nearly vanished, but his questions, still here. Isn't it calming that someone once tried to make sense of sleep? You are drifting into silence now, but somewhere in a smoky Mexican cantina, a voice cracks open the stillness. That's Chavela Vargas. Born in Costa Rica, raised in Mexico, she wore pants, drank tequila, and sang rancheras with slow-burning sorrow. Her voice, gravel and velvet. She defied every rule, openly gay, fiercely independent, unapologetically raw. They called her La Voz Áspera de la Ternura, the rough voice of tenderness. Imagine her under orange lanterns, cigarette between fingers, guitar across her lap. She doesn't perform. She confesses. She vanished for years, battled addiction, but returned in her 70s, haunting, wise, unshakable. Chavela sang heartbreak so honestly it made silence weep. Isn't it beautiful when a life itself becomes a love song? Hey friends, dim the lights a little more and listen. There's a strange, celestial harmony in the distance. That's Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century German abbess, composer, mystic, herbalist. She received visions from a young age, but instead of hiding them, she painted them, wrote them, sung them. She composed music that ripples with awe, like moonlight on a monastery floor. She wrote about medicine, botany, theology, and, unlike others of her time, she believed the body and soul healed together, with plants, sound, and rest. Imagine her in a cold scriptorium, ink freezing in her pot, whispering melodies into parchment. Her music was forgotten, then rediscovered. Now it plays again, in cathedrals, yoga classes, quiet corners of YouTube. Isn't it comforting? How voices can rise again, long after they've gone silent? You're shivering now, in your imagination at least, as we step onto the frozen tip of the earth. Here walks Matthew Henson, African-American explorer, Arctic pioneer. In 1909, he reached the North Pole with Robert Peary. Henson spoke the Inuit language, built sleds, hunted, mapped terrain. Yet most credit went elsewhere. Colored men don't get monuments, he once said, but the Inuit remembered. They gave him respect, stories, even family. Imagine him, face wind-burned, eyes locked on the ice horizon. Calm, focused, determined. He wasn't looking for glory, just truth. And long after, history thawed, and his name reappeared. Isn't it poetic that the coldest places can still warm a legacy? Dear listener, drift with me to ancient Athens, a courtroom, marble columns, and a voice, witty, sharp, fearless, Hyperides, one of the 10 great Attic orators, a champion of democracy, lover of freedom, and defender of women's rights in the 4th century BCE. He once defended a courtesan by baring her shoulder, letting her beauty plead her case. But behind theatrics was brilliance. He fought Macedonian tyranny, wrote speeches so rhythmic they danced. Only fragments survive. But oh, the fragments. They hum. Imagine him now, pacing before a crowd, robe fluttering, words dropping like polished stones. He was executed, his tongue reportedly cut out, but ideas don't bleed. Isn't it soothing to think that eloquence can echo longer than breath? Hey friends, let's curl up beside a fireplace stacked with thick, leather-bound books. Here sits Émilie du Châtelet, mathematician, physicist, philosopher, and Voltaire's match. Born in 1706, she translated Newton's Principia into French, adding her own notes and clarifications. It remains the standard version today. She debated gravity, light, and motion with the best minds in Europe, while raising children, studying at night, and drinking endless coffee. Imagine her scribbling formulas by candlelight, hair unpinned, music playing faintly in the next room. Voltaire said, "She was a great man whose only fault was being a woman. She died in childbirth. But her mind, fierce, clear, luminous, lives on in the laws of physics. Isn't it peaceful to think that light bends around forgotten names? Hey friends, you've heard of Paul Revere, right? But tonight, let's saddle a different horse, quietly, and ride through a rainy April night in 1777. Meet Sybil Luddington, 16 years old, brave, barefoot. When British troops raided nearby towns, Sybil rode 40 miles through the dark to rally her father's militia. Through woods and storm, past farms and fences, alone. She knocked on doors, shouted warnings, urged men to rise. Her ride was longer than Revere's, but you rarely hear her name in textbooks. Imagine her now, soaked to the bone, hair clinging to her cheeks, lantern swinging from her saddle. Not for glory, but for duty. When dawn came, troops were gathered, towns defended, and Sybil returned home, quietly. History may not have shouted her name, but we can. Isn't it calming to know that courage doesn't always ask for applause? Dear listener, your thoughts drift eastward now, across deserts and mountains, to a monk on a journey. Not for conquest, but for understanding. Xuanzang, 7th century. A Chinese pilgrim who walked from Chang'an to India in search of sacred Buddhist texts. He traveled 10,000 miles, on foot, by camel, through snow and sand. He studied Sanskrit, debated monks, collected scrolls. He returned to China years later, laden with scriptures, knowledge, and a deeper sense of compassion. Imagine him crossing a Himalayan pass, robes flapping, wind howling, pausing only to write, to pray, to think. His translation work shaped Chinese Buddhism for centuries. He saw religion as a bridge, not a barrier. He never ruled a kingdom, but he mapped one of the soul. Isn't it peaceful to know that some journeys are made with silence and scrolls? You are hearing an echo now, one you might recognize. For a name we whispered earlier, once wore another. Sor Filotea de la Cruz was a pseudonym, used to defend, critique, and survive. It belonged to Juana Inez, and also to the bishop who silenced her. But here's the twist. Juana turned the name back on him, used it to challenge oppression, to write in code, to speak when she was forbidden. Imagine her, hooded in candlelight, pen trembling, words masked as flattery but burning beneath. Philotea became a veil, a voice inside a voice, and centuries later, people still argue who truly wore it. Isn't it strange how silence sometimes wears a second name? Hey friends, take a deep breath and picture a wooden crate, just big enough for one man. Inside it, Henry Brown, an enslaved man in Virginia, 1849. He mailed himself to freedom. Yes, mailed. Sealed in a box 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, 2 feet deep. He traveled 27 hours by wagon, train, and boat, sometimes upside down. No food, no light, just hope. When the lid opened in Philadelphia, he stood and said, "How do you do, gentlemen?" Imagine that moment. Imagine that breath. He spent the rest of his life telling his story, in England, on stage, in silence and in song. Some called him a showman, others a genius. Either way, he escaped with nothing but imagination and courage. Isn't it powerful how a box became a doorway? Hey friends, turn the lights low. Let's drift back 4,000 years to a temple in ancient Sumer. Inside, a woman writes by torchlight. Her name was Enheduanna, priestess, poet, the first known author in human history. She wrote hymns to Inanna, goddess of love and war. She signed her name, something no one had done before. Imagine her voice echoing through stone halls, each word a braid of reverence and rhythm. She lived during empire and unrest. She was exiled, returned, and kept writing. Her verses weren't just prayers, they were power, protest, poetry. Centuries buried her memory, but archaeologists found her tablets, lines still clear, still fierce. She once wrote, "The light rose, the shadows fled." Isn't that a beautiful way to describe what stories do? Dear listener, picture a soft morning in Lahore, 1947. Trains hum on tracks, tea steams in cups, and a young journalist clutches a notebook to her chest. Yasmin Khan chronicled the human side of partition, the massive divide of India and Pakistan. But her name doesn't appear on monuments. Instead, she listened, took notes, wrote about fear and families, about how borders aren't always lines. They're memories, smells, shadows. She published in small presses, no grand speeches, just quiet documentation of displaced voices. Imagine her standing by a campfire, recording a grandmother's story while others sleep. She didn't try to explain the politics, only the people. Isn't it soothing to think that history also belongs to the soft-spoken? Hey friends, here's someone with no biography, no full name, just fragments. Denis Diderot, the great French Enlightenment thinker, had a daughter who was deaf. And so, he created the first systematic study of sign language for her. He observed her hands, learned her grammar, defended her right to learn, to think, to speak in gestures. He wrote, "She converses without a tongue. Imagine her now, signing by candlelight, laughter silent but radiant. A whole world, invisible to the ear, blooming in motion." She was never named in his major works, but she changed his entire worldview. Isn't it lovely when a child becomes a philosopher's teacher? Dear listener, you may have heard of Sundiata Keita, the founder of the Mali Empire. But have you heard of his mother, Sogolon? She was called the Buffalo Woman, a healer, a seer, a mother with steel in her voice. Her son was born weak, couldn't walk, laughed at by others. But Sogolon believed. She carried him, protected him, taught him until he stood, then conquered. Imagine her by the fire, grinding millet, eyes sharp, words soft but unbending. She gave rise to an empire not through war, but through will. Her lullabies became legends. Isn't it powerful how strength can begin with a whisper? Hey friends, close your eyes and picture a quiet university in 18th century Germany. A young black philosopher stands before a classroom. Anton Wilhelm Amo, born in present-day Ghana, taken to Europe as a child, raised in nobility, and became the first African to earn a doctorate in philosophy. He wrote in Latin, taught in Dutch, debated Cartesian dualism, arguing that the mind cannot feel pain. Some admired him, others mocked. Eventually, he returned to Ghana, where he walked the coast alone, thinking. Imagine him watching the Atlantic, on both sides of it, misunderstood. His work was nearly erased, but now it's returning, word by word. Isn't it comforting how minds can sail back from silence? You're settling in now, gently. But before you sleep, meet Fatima al-Ansari, a name nearly lost in dust, yet whispered in mosques across medieval Morocco. She founded one of the oldest libraries in the world, Al-Qarawiyin's sacred reading room. She safeguarded rare manuscripts with cedar shelves and silk bookmarks. No violence, no conquest, just careful preservation. Imagine her unlocking a wooden door, stepping into cool shadows lined with scrolls. She whispers prayers over ink and paper. She believed knowledge was trust, a duty, a kind of worship. Today, the library still stands, restored, loved, alive, and her name, still there, written softly in calligraphy. Isn't it beautiful? How guardianship can be silent, steady, and sacred. Hey friends, imagine a river in Vietnam, slow and winding, its banks thick with mangroves. And from the reeds emerges Nguyen Thi Dinh. Barefoot, determined, calm. She was the first female general of the Vietnam People's Army. But more than that, she was a symbol. During the resistance against French and American forces, she led women in guerrilla warfare, known as the Long-Haired Army. Not with noise, but with coordination, discipline, grit. Imagine her crouched beside a wooden canoe, whispering orders beneath moonlight, her hair tied back with twine, her breath steady. She helped organize logistics, food, medicine, alongside combat strategy. She believed war was tragic, but freedom required sacrifice. She rarely gave speeches, she simply acted. And after the war, she rebuilt villages, opened schools, taught peace. Isn't it powerful? How some leaders carry no sword, only silence and will? You are seated beside shelves of dusty scrolls where the scent of old paper meets rosemary and resin. There sits Al-Razi, Persian doctor, philosopher, and quiet challenger of norms. Born in 865 in Ray, Iran, he wrote hundreds of medical texts. He differentiated smallpox from measles, built hospitals, advocated for rational ethics, but perhaps most curiously, he believed healing wasn't only about medicine, but kindness. Imagine him at a patient's bedside, hands gentle, questions slow. He once placed slices of meat around a city. Where they rotted slowest, he built a hospital. Simple, observant. He doubted alchemy, questioned blind faith, but revered logic, compassion, and empirical care. Some called him eccentric, others a genius. Today, his books whisper through modern science, but few know his name. Isn't it soothing that wisdom once came with warm hands and patient ears? Dear listener, dim the lantern and step softly into the desert wind. A lone rider watches from a rocky ridge. Her name is Lozin, Chiricahua Apache, warrior, healer, sister to Chief Victorio. Lozin could sense enemies from miles away. Her people believed she had a gift, a spiritual radar for danger. She fought alongside men, carried children across battle lines, held her people together when hope frayed. Imagine her now, wind in her braids, rifle on her back, chanting softly to the horizon. Not out of anger, but protection. When captured, she was imprisoned, died far from her homeland, but her legend never left it. Her brother once said, "Lozin is my right hand, stronger than most men." Isn't it comforting to know that guardians come in all forms? Hey friends, let your thoughts travel far, across deserts, seas, cities. Imagine the rustle of maps, the creak of saddle leather. You are with Ibn Battuta. A 14th century Moroccan explorer, he traveled over 70,000 miles, further than Marco Polo, through Africa, India, China, the Middle East. But he didn't seek fame. He sought wisdom. He wrote detailed accounts of cultures, spices, beliefs, rituals. Sometimes poetic, sometimes puzzled, always observant. Imagine him beneath a palm tree, scribbling notes in his journal, his robe dusty, his sandals worn, his eyes bright with curiosity. He visited sultans and slaves, dervishes and doctors. He saw the world not as a tourist, but as a student. His writings were lost for centuries, but now they glow again. Isn't it lovely how travel once meant listening more than leaving? You're standing in a steamy jungle, sketchbook in hand. Butterflies flutter, leaves drip. And beside you is Maria Sibylla Merian, artist, scientist, dreamer. In 1699, she sailed to Suriname, alone at 52, to study insects. At a time when most believed in spontaneous generation, she observed metamorphosis. Patiently, precisely, she watched caterpillars eat, cocoon, emerge. She painted them brilliantly. Her drawings revealed life cycles no one had catalogued. Imagine her leaning in, nose inches from a cocoon, breath held, ink waiting. Outside, parrots call. Inside, awe. She wasn't praised. A woman, a naturalist, a traveler. Too much, they said. But her books survived. Her images still flutter on museum walls. Isn't it beautiful how transformation like hers can be slow and certain? Hey friends, look up at the night sky. See those twinkling stars? One of them might be whispering to Gersonides, a 14th century Jewish philosopher from Provence. He was a mathematician, astronomer, theologian. He built instruments to measure stellar distances, proposed ideas about the universe expanding long before telescopes. Imagine him on a stone balcony, notebook open, eyes squinting upward, wondering how light travels across time. He balanced science and faith, believed reason and belief were friends, not enemies. His works shaped medieval thought, but his name faded in the shadow of others. Still, stars don't forget. Isn't it peaceful to know that thinking deeply can echo through constellations? You are watching clouds drift lazily overhead, and cutting through them, 100 feet above, is Aida de Acosta, the first woman to fly a powered aircraft solo. The year was 1903, 9 months before the Wright brothers. She took a dirigible over Paris, alone, quietly, gracefully. Her parents were furious. No husband will want a flying woman, they said. So she stayed quiet. Her feat was tucked away for decades. But she went on to champion eye surgery, fund hospitals, and change lives. Imagine her floating above rooftops, scarf trailing, hands steady on the controls, not seeking headlines, just freedom. Her name may not be in textbooks, but the sky remembers. Isn't it calming when quiet firsts ripple gently into history? Dear listener, you've heard of Sundiata, the Lion King of Mali. But what of the man who told his story? The griot, the oral historian, the memory keeper. His name is unknown, but his voice traveled from fire to fire, through villages, centuries, empires. He sang of birth under hardship, of magic, of rise and reign. His words weren't just stories, they were identity. Imagine him seated beneath a baobab tree, voice low and rhythmic, children clustered at his feet. He speaks of ancestors, destiny, wind, and war. He didn't write, but his memory was sharp as a blade. Thanks to him, the epic of Sundiata lives on. Isn't it wondrous how some legacies are carried in breath, not ink? Hey, friends, You may know Queen Eleanor, but tonight, let's meet her daughters, Marie and Alex. Born in the 12th century, both governed lands, held courts, nurtured poetry. Quiet power. Marie of Champagne supported the first known female-authored romance novels. Alex of Blois ruled as regent. Intelligent, firm. Imagine them in candle-lit libraries, discussing politics over sweet wine, surrounded by troubadours and scrolls. They weren't warriors, but they shaped a literary age. Their influence is woven into courtly love, feudal diplomacy, and medieval culture. Yet they're footnotes in their mother's legend. Still, they shone, isn't it gentle justice to let forgotten daughters finally speak? You are near a willow grove, wind soft through silk sleeves. A woman writes a poem on rice paper. Her name is Wang Zhenyi, a 16th century Korean gisang, artist, poet, musician. She mastered the Korean seijo form, short, vivid, layered. She used it to speak of longing, of wit, of rain and red leaves. Men adored her, feared her mind, her beauty, her refusal to obey. Imagine her playing gayagum, notes floating like dragonflies, then penning lines sharper than any sword. She lived on her terms. Her poems, once whispered in secret, now bloom in textbooks. Isn't it lovely? How even brief verses can outlast entire dynasties. Hey, friends, close your eyes and imagine the soft clang of metal echoing through a royal courtyard in 17th century India. There stands Tarabai, sword at her hip, eyes unwavering. Widowed young, she became regent of the Maratha Empire after her husband's death. And when the Mughals invaded, Tarabai led armies herself. She negotiated, strategized, governed, all while raising her son to inherit a kingdom. Imagine her writing dispatches by lamplight, the scent of jasmine curling through her chambers, maps spread like quilts across the floor. She signed letters as Sarkar, not queen, but ruler. When her son was overthrown, she didn't vanish. She rallied again, rebuilt alliances, and endured. Quietly, without bitterness. Her name is often footnoted beneath male monarchs, but the empire stood because of her. Isn't it powerful, how calm strength can carry entire worlds? You are sailing beneath stars now, ocean breeze on your face. And beside you stands Tupaya, navigator, priest, artist, forgotten guide. Born in Ra'Iatea, he joined Captain Cook's first voyage as translator and navigator. He knew thousands of miles of ocean by heart, without maps, without compass. He spoke Tahitian, Maori, and English. Drew charts, described islands Europeans had never seen. Imagine him pointing to constellations, tracing wave patterns with his hands, explaining the language of swells. When Cook was lost, Tupaya knew the way. But illness took him before he could return home. His name rarely appears in exploration tales, and yet Cook's voyage would have failed without him. Isn't it peaceful to think that the stars once had their own interpreter? Dear listener, let's ride into the Bolivian highlands. Dust rises, wind howls. A woman leads rebel forces across the Andes. This is Juana Azurduy, guerrilla commander, mother, hero of South America's fight for independence. She carried a sword while pregnant, buried children between battles, and still she kept going. After her husband died in combat, she took command. She dressed in uniform, fought like fire. Imagine her now, beside a mountain fire, bandaging her arm, staring into smoke, already planning the next ambush. She died in poverty, forgotten. But today, statues rise in her honor. She once said, "If we women could unite, we would move the world." Isn't that a soft reminder that courage can wear braids and cradle? Hey friends, imagine a man too strange for even the strangest circles. Boxer, poet, forger, ghost. Arthur Craven roamed the early 1900s, claiming he was Oscar Wilde's nephew. He wrote bizarre essays, fought heavyweight champion Jack Johnson, gave lectures drunk, or in nothing but a cape. He didn't seek fame. He sought friction, movement, absurdity. Then he vanished off the coast of Mexico, his body never found. Some say he faked his death. Others say the sea kept him. Imagine him drifting in a boat, pockets full of ink-stained pages, whistling nonsense into the wind. He inspired the Dadaists, the Surrealists, but barely left a footprint. Isn't it strange how some lives are best remembered by their echoes? You are standing beneath the moonlight in Mecca, 6th century. A caravan returns. Its leader? A woman, wealthy, respected, independent. Her name was Khadijah, first wife of the Prophet Muhammad, first convert to Islam, first supporter of his mission. But before that, she was a merchant, running vast trade routes, employing men, managing negotiations. Imagine her under a silk tent, reviewing accounts by candlelight, her voice firm, her presence serene. She proposed marriage to Muhammad, encouraged his visions, comforted his doubts. Without her support, the early Islamic message may have withered. And yet, history too often dims her light. But tonight, she stands quietly, still. Isn't it calming to think that revolutions sometimes begin in gentle conversations? Hey, friends, dim the lights and picture Harlem at dusk. Jazz floating through open windows, smoke curling above typewriters. Here sits Claude McKay. Poet, rebel, architect of the Harlem Renaissance. Born in Jamaica, he wrote in dialect, then in sonnets, then in socialist essays. He explored identity, exile, justice, and longing, sometimes hopeful, often heavy. Imagine him at a cafe table, pencil tapping against glass, jotting lines that sting and soothe. His poem, "If We Must Die," was quoted in British Parliament and by street protesters. But he lived between places, admired but never embraced. Still, his voice shaped a movement. Isn't it comforting that art can find a home, even when the artist never does? You are in Hawaii now, palm fronds swaying above. And there, standing tall in a cloak of red and yellow feathers, is Ka'ahumanu. She was queen consort, then Kuhina Nui, prime minister, after King Kamehameha's death. And when he passed, she changed everything. She abolished the kapu system, broke taboos, shared meals once forbidden, encouraged literacy, embraced Christianity, but blended it with native beliefs. Imagine her speaking to a gathering by torchlight, waves crashing behind her, her words calm and firm. She defied chiefs, resisted missionaries, then outwitted them both. Her name means feather cloak of the bird. and she wore it lightly, wisely. Isn't it peaceful when power carries the weight of change so gently? Dear listener, drift back to a crumbling Roman Empire. Amidst collapse, war, plague, a woman governs with grace, Galla Placidia, daughter of an emperor, captive of the Goths, empress of the West. She was widowed, kidnapped, married, crowned, exiled, and returned, before most had finished reading her story. But she didn't shatter. She ruled. Imagine her seated beneath mosaics of gold and lapis, issuing edicts in a room of whispering courtiers. She built churches, brokered peace, shielded her son's reign. History labeled her a footnote, but in Ravenna her mausoleum still glows in blue. Isn't it lovely how legacy sometimes sleeps beneath stained glass? Hey, friends, picture the Scottish Highlands, mist curling over stone, and a woman in a long coat, writing Arabic verses in her notebook, Zainab Cobbled, born Lady Evelyn Murray, Victorian aristocrat, Muslim convert, pilgrim. In 1933, at 65, she became the first British-born woman to perform Hajj. She wrote of Mecca with reverence, of faith with clarity. She blended cultures not through noise, but through walking, reading, and listening. Imagine her sipping tea beneath a desert canopy, reflecting on prayer, humility, and Scottish rain. Her memoir faded, but today it resurfaces. She once said, "God has no country." Isn't that a quiet truth, worth resting your heart upon? You are in a Spanish studio, 17th century. Paint, dust, and silence. A man grinds pigment, patiently, precisely. His name is Juan de Pareja. Born enslaved, assistant to the great painter Diego Velázquez. But he painted, too. He was freed, became a portrait artist, and today, one of the most famous paintings of the era is a portrait of him. Imagine him watching Velázquez paint, then, one night, lifting a brush himself, cautiously, reverently. His work echoed with dignity, poise, pride. But his name, nearly forgotten until now, isn't it healing to remember the hands behind the masterpiece? Hey friends, if you have found peace in these stories, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. There are 20 more forgotten figures waiting to be gently remembered. Hey friends, picture a Danish garden under starlight. Scrolls flutter in the breeze, and beside a brass quadrant stands Sophia Brahe, noble woman, astronomer, sister. She helped her brother Tycho Brahe chart the heavens. They measured eclipses, tracked comets, predicted planetary motion. Sophia wasn't allowed into universities, so she taught herself astronomy, medicine, horticulture. She also tracked family trees, not of stars, but of people. Her genealogical research remains one of Denmark's most detailed. Imagine her adjusting celestial instruments, sleeves tied, hair pinned with care, patient, unflinching, observing. After Tycho left Denmark, Sophia stayed behind. She lived quietly, buried 3 husbands, grew flowers, watched the skies. Today, her name often disappears beneath her brothers, but her work, still cited, still echoing. Isn't it gentle justice when starlight remembers who lit the telescope? Dear listener, walk with me into the dense forests of colonial Mexico. Leaves rustle. Drums throb faintly. In the shadows, Gaspar Yanga waits, Enslaved and brought from West Africa, he escaped. For decades, he led a maroon community in the mountains, free, independent, defiant. He outmaneuvered Spanish forces, negotiated terms, and in 1618 he founded the first officially recognized free black settlement in the Americas, San Lorenzo de los Negros. Imagine him at dawn, barefoot on soil he claimed for freedom, watching the horizon like a quiet sentinel. He wasn't loud, he was steady. Yanga's town still exists, now called Yanga, Veracruz, but his name drifts quietly through history's underbrush. Isn't it peaceful to know that resistance can take root in stillness? You're lighting a candle now, flame flickering gently. And across a stone chamber sits Agnès Sorel, mistress, muse, and the first woman in France called official favorite. In the 15th century, she appeared at court in daring gowns, diamonds at her throat, confidence in her step. But beneath the silks, strategy. She advised King Charles VII, eased tensions, encouraged art and religion, even persuaded him to take back lost lands. She died young, poisoned perhaps. Jealousy runs deep. But her legacy lingered in portraits, perfumes, poems. Imagine her reclining in brocade, lips smiling, fingers ink-stained from letters written with care. She redefined power, not through thrones, but through presence. Isn't it soothing when elegance carries its own quiet strength? Hey friends, imagine a cavalry charge through snow and fire. At the front, a tall man with curls and command, General Dumas, born in Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, son of a French nobleman and an enslaved African woman. He rose to become the highest-ranking person of African descent in a Western army. He fought with Napoleon, but also questioned him. He led with honor. He refused corruption. Captured in Italy, he survived harsh imprisonment, returned home ill, forgotten. But his son, Alexandre Dumas, wrote The Count of Monte Cristo and The Three Musketeers. And many believe the heroism was inherited. Imagine the general on horseback, coat billowing, dignity unshaken. His story was buried, but the spirit still lives in pages. Isn't it lovely how courage can echo through generations? You are in Paris, 1930s. Jazz hums, smoke curls, and on a quiet stage stands Chen Qing, dancer, actor, bridge between continents. Born in China, raised in France, he performed in avant-garde theater, starred in silent films, modeled for artists. His presence, delicate, magnetic, layered. He wasn't famous, but he was seen, and he chose roles that defied cliches. No caricatures, just character. Imagine him mid-performance, sleeve flowing, expression subtle as breath. A moment, captured. Later, during the war, he disappeared from records. Perhaps he returned to China. Perhaps he didn't. His art, once flickering on silent screens, faded. Isn't it comforting that someone once danced softly across borders and left behind grace? Dear listener, step into a quiet classroom on the Sea Islands of South Carolina. A young black woman writes on the chalkboard. This is Charlotte Fortin Grimke. Born free in 1830s Philadelphia, she was a poet, teacher, and activist. During the Civil War, she taught formerly enslaved children to read and write. She believed education was a form of healing. And so, with each letter, each book, she rewrote futures. She also wrote poetry, melancholy, graceful, resilient. Her diary became one of the first published by a black woman in America. Imagine her in a sunlit classroom, chalk on her skirt, voice soft but certain. Her legacy lives not in monuments, but in minds opened by her lessons. Isn't that the gentlest kind of revolution? Hey friends, take a breath. We're walking through the foothills of Northern California, 1911. And from the wood steps, a man without a tribe, without a name. They call him Ishi. He was the last known member of the Yahi people. He wandered into town alone, hungry, silent, gentle. Anthropologists studied him. He taught them flint knapping, stories, songs. He became a bridge to a vanished world. But he never gave his real name. In Yahi tradition, one never speaks their own name. Imagine him crafting an arrowhead in a museum basement, humming softly to himself. He died of tuberculosis, but his culture, through him, survived a little longer. Isn't it humbling how one quiet person can carry an entire world? Dear listener, imagine a woman in medieval Syria, seated behind a window lattice, reciting poems into the breeze. Her name was Fatima al-Ma'ari, poet, philosopher, observer of contradictions. Though little is written about her, fragments survive. Sharp verses about justice, faith, and fate. She questioned blindly accepted norms. She honored the overlooked. And though she lived in purdah, seclusion, her mind wandered freely. Imagine her ink-stained fingers tapping a rhythm on wood. Outside, birds chatter. Inside, thoughts bloom. In a world that wanted silence, she answered with metaphor. Isn't it soothing that truth can hide in syllables? Hey friends, you know the song, "The Lion Sleeps Tonight." But do you know the man? Solomon Linda, Zulu singer, South Africa, 1939. He composed Mbube, a soaring, rhythmic chant that became a global anthem. He was paid little. The song was sold, remixed, rebranded. Disney made millions. His family lived in poverty. Decades later, they sued and won. But Solomon, he died with a soft voice, a modest life, and a melody that never left. Imagine him in a Johannesburg studio, eyes closed, harmonizing with eternity. Isn't it bittersweet? How a lullaby can outlive its singer. You are standing under cherry blossoms. The year is 1868. The Boshin War rages in Japan, and riding into battle, hakama flowing, is Nakano Takeko. She wasn't supposed to fight, but she did. With a naginata, a bladed pole weapon, she led a band of women warriors. They were called the Joshitai. She died in battle, asked her sister to cut off her head, to keep it from enemy hands. It was buried under a pine tree. Today, schoolgirls in Aizu carry naginata in her honor during festivals. Imagine her still, facing a battlefield not with fear, but resolve. Isn't it peaceful to know that grace and bravery sometimes ride side by side? Hey friends, picture a library in 9th century Baghdad, incense curling through arches. At its center, a man writes with tireless care. His name is Al-Kindi, philosopher, mathematician, music theorist, translator of Aristotle, known as the philosopher of the Arabs. He introduced Indian numerals to the Islamic world, wrote about optics, medicine, and sound. He believed everything, grief, light, perfume, had pattern and reason. He also invented a method of breaking ciphers, the first known cryptographic analysis. Imagine him now, humming softly, testing scales on a lute, then returning to formulas with a smile. He believed knowledge was beauty, harmony. His name faded, but his fingerprints linger in algebra, encryption, and acoustics. Isn't it lovely? How one quiet mind can weave music into mathematics. You are under a warm quilt, eyes half shut. And somewhere in 1861, a woman lights a candle and begins to write her truth. Her name was Harriet Jacobs, born enslaved, hidden for 7 years in an attic crawlspace, then free and ready to speak. Her book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, revealed what others wouldn't: the abuse, the choices, the cost of survival. She wrote with elegance, with sorrow, with clarity. Imagine her pressing quill to paper in candlelight, breath visible in the winter air. She wanted not revenge, but understanding. Her story was ignored for decades, then rediscovered. Isn't it healing when silence finally finds its voice? Hey friends, ever wonder why water swirls down a drain, or why hurricanes spin? Meet Gaspard Gustave de Coriolis, the 19th century French scientist who first described the Coriolis effect. But that's not all. He also improved the equations behind rotating systems, helping lay groundwork for modern physics and engineering. He wasn't famous in his time, just precise, steady. Imagine him leaning over a chalkboard, drawing arcs, sipping coffee, wind tapping against the window. He died young, exhausted, but today every spinning storm and satellite whispers his name. Isn't it peaceful when motion carries memory? You are floating now, mentally at least, in the cool waters off Australia. Beside you swims Annette Kellerman. Athlete, performer, designer, rebel, she helped popularize synchronized swimming, set long-distance records, advocated for women's health and physical freedom. And, perhaps most memorably, she wore the first one-piece swimsuit in public, and was arrested for it. Imagine her diving from a high board, arms poised like wings, laughter bubbling up with each splash. She later starred in silent films, wrote books, designed swimwear. She believed beauty meant strength, grace, and ease. Isn't it refreshing when courage wears a smile and swims upstream? Dear listener, let's walk into a storm of powdered wigs and revolution. A Haitian-born man stands tall in French Parliament. His name, Jean-Baptiste Belle. Former enslaved person, revolutionary, elected deputy of Saint-Domingue. He fought for the abolition of slavery and won. He stood on marble floors and demanded dignity. His portrait, painted with a bust of Enlightenment thinker Raynal, as if to say, ideas mean nothing without action. Imagine him standing proud, hand on hip, gaze unwavering, a calm force in chaos. Later, Napoleon re-enslaved Haiti. Belle was imprisoned, forgotten. But his stance, his voice, carved a path. Isn't it bold when freedom speaks softly but never begs? Hey friends, feel the Cairo sun warming your shoulders. A crowd gathers. And from the train steps Huda Sha'arawi, activist, organizer, visionary. In 1923, she removed her veil in public, not as rejection, but declaration. We choose for ourselves. She founded Egypt's first feminist union, built schools, shelters, hosted salons where ideas bloomed beside mint tea. She wasn't always welcomed, but she was always heard. Imagine her arranging flowers before a lecture, hands graceful, voice steady, children peeking from corners. She didn't burn bridges, she built roads. Isn't it inspiring when tradition and progress walk side by side? You are sitting beside a lacquered desk, cicadas humming outside. A man polishes a watch, delicately, deliberately. This is Yasuyuki Shuto. He was a Japanese railway worker and horologist. In post-war Japan, he devoted his life to restoring clocks damaged in Hiroshima. Not because they ticked, but because they stopped. Each clock told a story, a time of impact, a frozen breath. He cleaned them, preserved them, let them speak without speaking. Imagine him in a quiet room, surrounded by ticking, each second a tiny tribute. He never sought attention, only remembrance. Isn't it moving when time itself becomes an act of care? Hey friends, breathe gently. Picture a quiet park bench in wartime Paris. A young woman sits, calm, composed, hiding a radio under her coat. Noor Inayat Khan, Indian princess, Sufi mystic, British spy. She joined the Special Operations Executive, trained in Morse code, parachuted into occupied France, transmitted intelligence, escaped arrest twice. She refused to name names, even under torture. She died with the word liberté on her lips. But she was also a writer of children's books, a dreamer, a harpist. Imagine her at twilight, fingers resting on piano keys, thoughts floating between shadows and silence. She was posthumously awarded the George Cross. Isn't it beautiful? When bravery comes wrapped in gentleness. You are in a law library now. Books tower above. A small figure moves between shelves. This is Pauli Murray, lawyer, poet, priest, pioneer. Black, queer, brilliant, ahead of every era they lived in. They coined the phrase Jane Crow to describe race and gender discrimination. Their legal arguments helped shape Brown v's Board of Education. Ruth Bader Ginsburg cited them in court. But for decades, Pauli was overlooked. They became the first black person perceived as female to be ordained an Episcopal priest. They wrote poems about loneliness and liberty. Imagine them writing late at night, candle flickering, scripture open beside law codes. Their voice, soft but seismic. Isn't it freeing when one life bridges all identities? Dear listener, this is our final stop. Picture a Harlem stage in the 1920s. A woman with a sharp pen and sharper wit takes a bow. Eulalie Spence, a playwright, teacher, Bahamian-born, a lesser-known gem of the Harlem Renaissance. She wrote comedies, ghost stories, complex characters. She believed theater could entertain and uplift. Her students would go on to shape black cinema, but she stayed behind the curtain, grinning. Imagine her backstage, holding a script, humming softly, surrounded by paper roses and chalk dust. She didn't chase fame, she taught, she created, she lasted, and now we remember. Isn't it the perfect curtain call, when the quiet voice gets the last word?